Hello, everyone, and welcome to Current's webinar on The Way We Work Now, which is part of Current's special coverage of how the coronavirus pandemic continues to change public media. I'm Caryn Everhart, the managing editor of Current, and my guests are two executives who lead major market stations that are known for innovation and community service. Caryn Mathis is president and GM of Seattle's KUOW, the first NPR station to cover a local COVID outbreak. Caryn previously led WAMU in Washington, D.C., and WDET in Detroit, where she also served as news director. Amy Shaw is president and CEO of 9 PBS, which is previously known as the 9 Network of St. Louis. In her earlier jobs at the station, Amy created a model for community engagement in public media. She led several CPB-funded national engagement projects, including the American Graduate Initiative to support high school students. Both Caryn and Amy were able to steer their stations through the 2020 pandemic without layoffs or furloughs. And they made a point of prioritizing the safety and well-being of their staff and the decisions they made. Thanks to both of you for taking the time to discuss how you did this and the difference it's making in the ways you work now. Thanks to all of you for joining us and to participate in the conversation. I invite you to share your questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to those soon. Caryn, my first question is for you. Seattle was the first US city to have a COVID-19 outbreak, and your news team was on the front line of covering the crisis for public radio listeners. Looking back, what do you see as the first, most significant decision you made in response to the emerging public health crisis?
Well, thank you, Caryn. I would stress that the first most important thing to do is have disaster preparedness and a business continuity plan in place before the disaster. And trust me, your staff is going to fight you on this effort because it's tedious work that doesn't immediately contribute to goals or to the bottom line. But back in 2018, we had brought in outside experts who ran surprise tabletop disaster exercises. We walked through department by department, step by step, what needed to happen if business as usual was blown up. But having that business continuity plan in place really saved us when a public health emergency hit, even though public health emergency was nowhere in our brains when we were doing the business continuity plan. We were thinking earthquake, Mount Rainier blows up, bridges collapsing, but every staffer in the office had a laptop that they could undock and take home. We had bug out mobile kits for reporters. We had a reciprocal agreement with KEXP in our market that we could run to and broadcast from each other's facilities if one of us was incapacitated. So when it came time to say, we can't be in the building together anymore, and we did that early. That was March 6th, that we decided at 2 p.m. on Thursday that Friday we were going to essential staff only and work from home. It made that decision a little bit easier when we had the bones of remote work already in place. And so I had the validation of staff telling me, God, we hated that business continuity planning process that took so many hours, but thank goodness we did it.
Yeah. Amy, you became the CEO of 9 PBS about 6 weeks before the pandemic lockdowns began last year.
Yes.
Tell us about your first decisions in response to the health crisis. What did you prioritize?
So I'll even go back further than that. We were in a bit of a crisis even 9 months before that. So people will remember that we lost Jack Galmish, our president and CEO, very unexpectedly in April 2019. So, we thought we had weathered something so monumental. And so when the pandemic came upon us, it was, I think, a little bit of incredulity in terms of, oh my gosh, we're dealing with another crisis. Our first priority was the health and well-being and safety of our staff. And so the decisions of how to get everybody home safely, how to continue everything that we were doing and the operations. And then secondarily, but equally as important, was the needs of our community. And so there were lots of organizations that could do lots of different things. What were our unique contributions. What was the highest and best use of our resources? So education, especially of our most vulnerable students, became a very large priority. And then also, especially in the senior community, you'll remember that all of the senior living communities in every community around the country really were shut down. And so the isolation, so we had, our major gift team, our plan giving team, who were making nonstop phone calls to those donors, to those members who we knew were going to be really isolated, and then making sure that our storytelling on air leveraged our trust and made sure that people were informed and not frightening them and not anxiety producing. Everybody was anxious enough. And then the third piece of that was, thinking longer term. So we knew that it wasn't going to be a short-term thing. So how are we going to keep this going? And how are we going to maintain the pace without burning everybody out, which reads back to the safety and well-being of our staff, for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to think about all at once.
A lot, yeah, absolutely.
Caryn, you were able to avoid layoffs and furloughs through a combination of budget cuts and a membership campaign that raised an astounding $1 million in one day.
Yep.
What did you learn from that drive that changed the way that you fundraise?
Well, once we had the onset of the pandemic, we started thinking, well, when will we be able to fundraise again, and what will we say? And this is an instance where our emeritus board, these were former governing board members, we went to them and tested messaging with them. And I have to tell you that the original messaging that we put in front of them, they told us in no uncertain terms it was terrible. We had to throw it all out, and we started again. And they said, if you think you can fundraise, you've got to make it about the audience and their needs and not about the station. And intrinsically, we know that, but I think in the moment, you're worried about what's going to happen. We had, as you said, cut over $1 million, almost $1.5 million out of our run rate because we made preserving existing staff jobs job one. And so we trimmed around the edges. Any open positions, we left them open. And so we did not have a single financially driven furlough or layoff. But, when we fine-tuned that messaging and got some outside eyes and ears to look at it and really refined it, then we talked about service, and we were able to continue service. And our journalism team was amazing. Our daily weekday public affairs show had such great connections that, as soon as the governor would get done with his press conference for the day, bam, we had him on a live call-in where listeners could talk to him. Same thing with the head of county health and a convergence of mayors in our region talking about what to do. So, the stellar journalism, the back-end infrastructure, people doing what they needed to do and serving the audience and then reminding them of that service, I think was really effective. That was a bold move for us to try $1 million one day, $1 million. But people were grateful for the service that we had provided, the information we had provided. A lot of times the questions from the call-in were the same questions, but people needed to ask those questions again and again and again because there was so much uncertainty.
Caryn, can you tell us what we're seeing on the screen right now? This picture here, I mean, you're talking about focusing on the journalism.
Yes. Casey Martin, he and our photojournalist Megan Farmer were totally ground zero. They were at the Life Care Senior Center day after day after day, waiting for information that was coming out. Also, something unusual about the year that we went through was that we kept having very stressful things layered on top of one another with nothing abating. So, we're in a pandemic, and then we have the social justice upheaval. And so Casey, we had some other reporters in the field as well, but Casey and Megan were the first out there for the Life Care Center. And, they had to suit up in a different way. It kind of broke my heart when I was signing requisitions for gas masks and bulletproof vests. That picture in the upper right is Casey getting his weekly COVID test. One of the things that we did to protect people was that if they accepted a field assignment, then they couldn't come back to our main building. And we did what we could to outfit them so that they could report from the field, report and edit and broadcast from home. But I think that contributed to us not having a single confirmed case of COVID among any of our employees. But man, it was stressful, it was traumatic. I really feel that a lot of our people are still suffering from some post-traumatic stress syndrome, because it was just thing after thing after thing of the pandemic and violent protests, and then what was going on in the national scene politically that trickled down to our state and locally. It was just an unrelenting time. So we did keep people safe. We had tons of PPE that we shipped to people's homes. There's another photo that you have, I think, in our array of how we disinfected the studios. We had a handful.
Yeah, Julie's going to show us a video, a slide about that. Julie, can you put that on screen? You can describe it for us, Caryn?
So this is ultraviolet light disinfection of the studios. We had another closet that we turned into a UV disinfection closet, and reporters could come to the front door, drop off their equipment. Somebody would come out, in full PPE, bring it in, put it in the disinfection closet, give it back to them. And so just unimaginable things that we had never planned for. But again, as I said at the outset, having this business continuity thought that we might not be able to work together, everything might have to be remote, kind of prepared us for being nimble to do all of the things that we needed to do. But we managed to keep everybody safe, and as far as we know, no one was infected. So we're very,
That's great.
very grateful.
Congratulations.
For that. Thank you.
Amy, after the schools closed in St. Louis, 9PBS launched Teaching in Room 9, which was a block of, or is, I should say, because it's ongoing, a block of programs featuring lessons presented by local pre-K and early elementary teachers. Given the disruptions that you had to your in-person community engagement work, how did you make sure that the children who were most at risk of learning loss knew to tune into the program?
So in the intro, you referenced our engagement model, and we really take that seriously. So this was very, simultaneously trying to get everybody home, figure out how we were going to keep everything afloat. The only thing that we really stopped doing was in-person events. Everything else continued, it just continued it in a different way. And obviously everybody knows the layering of that, of how to do that was quite difficult. And one of the things we did very early on was reach out to a group of superintendents who we knew. They convened a Zoom meeting for our team. And we said, listen, the schools had just announced that they were going remote. There are 70 plus individual public school districts in the St. Louis region. So there isn't one way of doing it. There are 70 different ways plus. And the schools were really clamoring for support, and they were in chaos. And so we convened this meeting. We said to them, listen, we know we have a role to play here, but we don't want to assume what you need. Tell us what you need. And they said three key things. One, they were very concerned about younger children because they weren't used to a remote learning environment. Mm-hmm. Two, they were concerned about our most vulnerable children. 1 in 3 kids in the St. Louis region do not have reliable internet and or devices. So we knew that that was going to be a huge challenge in terms of remote learning. And then the third piece they said was they're very concerned about literacy and math in particular in terms of subject areas. And so we launched an online toolkit for parents, caregivers, students, learners of all types, which leveraged all kinds of resources that we had at our disposal. And then within a month, we launched Teaching in Room 9, which is the on-air classroom. We took off in our daytime PBS Kids block. We normally have a break where we do 2 hours of adult content. We took those 2 hours off. We put on Teaching in Room 9. We did an open call for teachers through this big superintendent and curriculum group. We got about 40 applications. We whittled it down. We had 13 teachers that we've been working with. We started that in April. It is ongoing. It will continue to go on indefinitely, because what we've found is that people are responding. Our teachers get fan mail regularly. The ratings are good. We know that it is hitting the kids who are most in need based on the ratings data through track. It's been a really good thing. And now we're going to transition it to mitigating summer learning loss. We also know that kids are not going to ever really go back to the classroom the way that they were before. They may be in person, but there will be no snow days anymore. We know that learning has changed forever. And so how do we play a role in that? This is Dr. Sanders. I wish it was a better picture, but this is actually a reporter from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch who tweeted this. Dr. Sanders is really our #1 teacher and gets fan mail routinely. And what I love about this in particular is that Dr. Sanders is an early educator. He teaches in St. Louis public schools. He's a 6' plus African-American man with dreadlocks, as you can see. And kids of all varieties love him. And I think so representation really matters, especially for the kids who we've been targeting. And our network of partners has also been very helpful in making sure that we were doing the right things, pushing in the right direction. But I also love the fact that every kid has loved Dr. Sanders. I mean, we just get fan mail nonstop for him. And so teaching in room 9, this using our resources for their best and highest use. You know, unlike Caryn, we're not a news operation.
Right.
Our colleagues at St. Louis Public Radio were doing that admirably. But what could we do? How could we mobilize our resources? And I do want to give a shout out to our staff, because it's not like pre-pandemic anybody was sitting around trying to fill the hours of their day. Everybody was pretty full up in what they were doing. And so the things that we were doing was on top of all of the other things that we were doing. And while our staff were trying to figure out how to teach their kids at home, how to manage their lives in this very scary and chaotic time. And so I couldn't be prouder of how our team has pulled together, how we've used it as an operation for culture and shift in our work. This is, again, we continue to produce content repeatedly. I just had a cat join this webinar, working from home. This is the Public Media Commons, which is an outdoor space that we share with St. Louis Public Radio, our neighbor, even though we're separately licensed. And we were doing a show on kids and racism, and we knew we just needed to do it in a different way. So we did an hour-long special. We shot it outside. Everybody is masked up until they go on camera. Our producer, our senior director of content on the left there is Anne Marie Berger. Great trusted partners who are talking about kids, race, and racism. You know, we continue to produce and produce and produce.
Is that show available on your website?
It is, yeah, it's absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, there's even there's even a new one that we just did, which is on childcare, which is a huge issue for so many families. So what were the topics? And obviously, as Caryn mentioned, the social justice layering on top of a global pandemic, it was a big 1-2 punch. And so what role could we play? And again, people come to us, we're trusted for telling good stories and telling stories in a way that really leverages the community and respects the community. And so these kinds of content enterprises are very, very important. And all of that is available on our website. And we were doing reporting on COVID, regular reporting, telling joyful stories about COVID. There's a story in
Okay. If you don't mind, I want to stop you there and invite the audience to give us post their questions in the Q&A. I want to focus on one thing that's come up in both of yours and Caryn's remarks, and that's, responding to the stress of the constant pace of work within this difficult environment. Caryn, you told us earlier that staff morale and emotional well-being have been a huge challenge at KUOW. What did you witness and what did you do about it?
Well, we're still working through it because, a whole new level of anxiety is arising as we approach workplace reintegration. But it came out very starkly that preserving people's jobs and preserving the safety of their bodies was not enough. That was not enough. And we tried to do morale boosting, sending people goodie packets of fun things. We had a lot of support from our licensee, University of Washington, which is also at the forefront of the pandemic. The employee assistance program partner that they had been on the ground in Wuhan, China. So very experienced employee assistance partner, and they had handbooks and webinars and how to set up your home office and ergonomics and nutrition and hydration and get up and move every hour. And so we leaned into all of that, and it was still just traumatic. For so long in the pandemic, the information was ambiguous. The information kept changing. We didn't know how bad is bad, how high is it going to get, and just that uncertainty. And we didn't require people in Zoom meetings to keep their cameras on, but when they did, I would be scanning the screens to try to look at people and see what's going on with them. I had one employee who regularly just seemed to be clutching her cat for dear life in the Zooms. And, I told her supervisor, check in on that person. There may be something going on there. So just trying to attend to the whole being and the mental well-being, even with all the resources that we had, being a big station, part of a big university with a big experienced wellness partner, it was really tough, and we're still going through that.
Yeah.
We have a value set at KUOW, and there's fairness and equity, and we're going to assume good intent first. And I feel like all of our values have been shredded. People are angry and touchy and mistrustful, and it's just really, really hard. And so we're going to have to navigate that next phase through a lot of collaboration, a lot of one-to-one communication, being transparent with staff. Okay, we're going to share what our reentry plan may be. What do you think? It's a pilot. It's not, set up in concrete yet. And just talking to people, because people are very, this was an injurious time. We are all injured, and I think in ways that we don't even realize yet.
Yeah. Amy, 9PBS was the first public TV only station to join the Public Media for All Coalition and embrace accountability in its pledges for concrete DEI reforms. Why was that important to you, and where are you in those efforts?
So, maybe I was naive because I was so new into the job. So interim for 9 months and then officially became the CEO in February 2020. I think it responds to one of the questions that's in the Q&A is this, how do we know where our staff are? So we've been meeting as a senior team. Initially, we met every day of the week in those early days of the pandemic. And the question was always like, how you doing? On a scale of 1 to 10, and there's these very funny memes where you can sort of figure out where you are. So we were always asking where people were, and also asking team leaders to check in on their colleagues and make sure that they were doing okay. So we're constantly asking, much like the engagement model, we've turned the engagement model inside to the organization. And so, we've had the opportunity to shift our culture just because of new leadership. That was obviously going to happen anyway, but I think it helped us break a lot of bad habits, and it helped us advance this conversation around DEI and belonging really being a key thing, and making sure that a lot of staff across the organization were involved in that. I can set the tone, but I can't do all that work. And so our Senior Director of Organizational Excellence, Kate Midgett, has been a big driver of this. But when I saw the Day of Education come across the transom and this idea of public media for all, I looked at the list and I thought, wow, this is exactly what we're doing. This is what we're aspiring to. I talked with our strategy team about it and said, I sense this is a really good thing for us, not only for the accountability, but just another set of tools and resources. And, the senior team agreed. And then I do a daily update for staff as well. That was something that our staff said was really important. They didn't like the idea that the strategy team was meeting and they didn't necessarily know what we were talking about. So the notes are published every day. tidbits of information, all to keep people connected and to really just make sure that people knew that we cared about them. So I shared it in a daily update, and we did the day of education. You know, nobody took the sick day to my knowledge, but just it was another set of tools and resources. And my feeling is that none of this is going to get any easier. You know, our world is in cataclysmic shift and change, and the demographics of our country are changing. And frankly, our audiences may not really reflect that right now, which means we need to redouble our efforts internally and externally to ensure that our work reflects the larger community, which is so much part of our DNA at 9 PBS. But we really need the tools and resources to help us reflect our community, to engage our community around what matters. And I feel like Public Media for All is a resource for this. And in engagement work, there's something called a critical friend, Caryn, and it's where you hold up a mirror and you say, this is what this looks like. And we all need somebody to say, like, you know, you've got some salad in your teeth. This is what you need. Right? I would much rather have people in our industry holding up that mirror, people who love the industry and who are saying, we can get better and here's how we do it. I'd much rather have that than having it come from outside and pushing and being reactive versus being proactive. So that's why we felt like Public Media for All. I felt like Public Media for All was a critical resource for us.
Well, while we're talking about DEI, I want to invite everyone to Current's next Local That Works webinar. It's going to be on June the 8th, and executives from WFAE in Charlotte will share their strategy for building an inclusive public radio service. You can click on the link in the chat to reserve a spot. Let's stick with this question about how you're preparing for the return to the workplace. Caryn, you've mentioned that you've developed a pilot. You know, what are you hearing from your employees about the return, and how is that influencing the way you proceed?
Yeah, we'll start on the reentry pilot in a few weeks. What we already had, because University of Washington required it, was a COVID safety and workplace reentry manual. And it's quite extensive, and we have a seat map, so we know if we have to maintain distancing even after reentry. We know how many, what's the head count we can have on our 2 floors. It comes out to about 40% capacity, and I don't know what kind of all clear we may get if we ever get one, you know, with everybody back in the pool. So we're planning on, once we start reentry, we'll probably hold at that 40% occupancy maximum for a while and just see what happens. But there's a lot of, on the part of the staff, there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of fear. Some people were able to do their work from out of state, and they're like, this works. Do I have to come back? And I believe that a hybrid workplace is the future, and that's what's in our heads as we build this pilot for workplace reentry. We want to start with a coalition of the willing first, as much as we can, but it's going to be a balancing act, because I think there's a lot that is lost in being remote that we're not even aware of. I worry about our younger employees, our persons of color employees, that you need to be more visible. You need to be, you know, next to your manager and interacting with your colleagues and your manager. That's good for equity and advancement and professional development. And if we don't have enough critical mass in the office to maintain that collaboration and collegiality, then I think we're siphoning off something there important. So I feel very under pressure to get the reentry program correct, but I'm not quite sure what correct looks like. And so I think just a lot of contact and communication with the staff will be key.
Are you going to be asking for volunteers for that 40% capacity? And are you, or have you decided how you proceed with that?
It's a mix. I mean, the ad hoc team I've put together, we're going to go department by department and do scenario running of, well, what would it look like if none of the membership people ever came back to the office? What would that look like, and do the pros and cons, and going function unit by unit, to think about that, ask people questions. I'm having a meeting later today with somebody who wants to talk about that in their unit. And then also, already I've had volunteers. We have 2 people besides, well, actually no, it's about 4 people beyond the essential staff that are mandated to be there, that have said, we want to go back. We want to, and University of Washington allows that. They have to agree to go by the manual, distancing, masking, vaccinated or not, use the PPE that we have available. I'm going back into the office 3 days a week, probably starting in August, just because I need to get back in that groove again. And I think it's important for our mental well-being, our restoring our values set and trust and collegiality, that we have at least some critical mass in the building together.
Yeah. Amy, how are these conversations going at 9 PBS?
We put together also an ad hoc committee very early on, and it's we tried very hard to think about what the future looked like, and of course a lot of plans early on. We realized just, okay, this is going to be a lot longer than we anticipated. So we have a group. We've been knocking down all kinds of things that our staff have wanted to know about. And so as a strategy team, we talked about it. As the special committee, we talked about it. And then we opened it up to all staff to say, what are your concerns? And we actually did it as a breakout session in one of our biweekly all staff meetings. And there were some common themes. And as Caryn mentioned, there's some folks that really are just itching to get back into the station. They want it to be back to normal and they want to come back. There are others who have said, I really don't feel like I need to come back into the building ever to do my job. And so these are interesting challenges. Even pre-pandemic, we were working one day, or we'd offered the option of working 1 day a week remote. Post-pandemic, or now new normal, next normal, will be up to 3 days a week. You can work remotely, work it out with your team leader. We'll figure it out. All the rooms are being outfitted to make sure that we're capable to do Zoom meetings. And so if you're in the office and half your team's at home, great, we're going to figure it out. And how are ways that we're going to retrofit the building to figure out this new way of working? So we were there, I like Caryn, I'm going in a couple days a week, and we were there with this team looking at where the spacing is. Missouri doesn't have any requirements. So like our area, you can be pretty much at 100% capacity, and that's fine. And so we are trying to figure out where everybody goes, assuming that everybody's going to come in at least 2 days a week. Where does everybody go? How do we work? What does that look like? And again, taking the cue from staff. We have a lot of staff, I think, that are very concerned about this.
Do you have an open workspace that you're going to have to reconfigure?
Yes, we have lots of open workspaces that have to be reconfigured, that's what we looked through. We're reworking some spaces that are closets right now to give people some private spaces, to separate more people apart. So yeah, we're going to figure it out. And our content team they're reworking their space. Theirs is all open. So we've unbanked all the tables, workstations, so that everybody can be separate and it can be very portable. But we're just going to be very flexible, and we're going to be checking in with staff quite regularly. We're really trying to create the culture where people feel very comfortable to say what's on their mind and what they're thinking, and ask the questions and ask for what they need, and build leadership at all levels in the organization, so that we're not just blindly thinking everything's great.
Yeah.
And we're not taking care of staff. And I think, Caryn's right. We're going to be in a very different place for a long time. And I think the effects of this, in terms of what staff are thinking and feeling and what they've experienced, is going to be with us for a long time. And while today you may be a 10 feeling good, tomorrow you may be a 2. And so how do our staff, how do we take care of each other in that process?
How many people work at 9 PBS?
We're about 60 people, 60 full-time, and then we've got a fair amount of part-time folks who are our videographers and our extra boards, if you will. So, we're not a huge operation, which I will mention in the midst of all this, as part of our work on culture and DEI and belonging, we launched 4 employee resource groups, which in my mind, I always thought employee resource groups were about that you had to be a really big corporation preparation to do that. But our 4 employee resource groups, which are parents of children, especially young children,
Mm-hmm.
especially because that group has had to manage a lot this last
Yeah.
year, BIPOC, LGBTQIA, and then younger professionals. And so those ERGs they each meet monthly. They've really served as a way to keep people connected and surface all kinds of challenges and find lots of camaraderie and ways to work out issues and challenges. And also just this idea of DEI and belonging.
That sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been really, really helpful to have all that. And our staff, again, have really responded well to that.
Caryn, how many people work at KUOW?
All told, we have 137.
And are you thinking about reconfiguring your newsroom or your open workspaces?
Our plan right now calls for distancing, and so the people that do come back may not be in the workspace they're used to. So we're going to have to allow time for people to kind of scoop up everything and move it. The seat map that I mentioned that we have doesn't have any names in it yet, but we know where bodies can go. And so we'll be working that out longer. I started to say long term. It's already been long term. If it's much longer term, then we may have to look at physical reconfiguration. But right now, we'll just, we have one open large cubicle set in the administrative area, and we're putting, people kitty corner. If you're in one row here on the aisle side, then somebody else can be in the next row on the window inside. And so that's how we're doing the distancing, because not only do they have to work distanced, you have to stay distanced when you get up to go to the restroom. So we've plotted pathfinding, wayfinding, all of that into our 40% maximum occupancy plan.
I wanted to ask you both about some audience trends and your response to those. And Caryn, the pandemic just triggered a big decline in drive time listening to public radio. And you had told us earlier, it really accelerated your audience's flight to digital platforms like smart speakers.
It compressed everything by probably a year and a half, 2 years. The trends we had been seeing before, it just really compressed it.
How are those changes affecting your planning how are those changes in audience behavior affecting your decisions about the new normal for how you're going to operate?
Well, interestingly, we're seeing that big news events always drive people back to us, but we're planning in our next fiscal year, which starts July 1, to re-energize our budget and start, making more stuff for digital, more on-demand content, more things on the web. We were leaning into our DEI work. We've had a racial equity team for more than 4 years now. And so we've been leaning into this for quite some time and working on diversity sourcing and changing the voice and inviting the community into our editorial priorities and planning and feedback, and viewing the community as more than just recipients of our work. They're partners in our work. And so one really interesting thing that happened is, yes, the broadcast pie is getting smaller. We still have a big piece of that shrinking pie for linear broadcasting, but we now have among the youngest age cohort in broadcasting in public radio. And we thought, well, how did that happen? We think that's a good thing. I think maybe it's because generally younger cohorts are more diverse. And so because we've been trying to tailor our programming to have a different voice, maybe it's attracting a different group. I think the biggest, fastest pivot we had to make, we had banked on a lot of audience engagement. We were planning on doing 60 to 100 live events in the field when the pandemic hit. And we really didn't have any particular expertise for YouTube or any of that. And we stood up a YouTube channel and continued our events that way. And we're getting way more people attending than we ever would have in person. So I think that's a hybrid piece that's going to continue into the future as well.
That's great. Amy, how have pandemic viewing trends changed your priorities for general audience programming? What are you going to be doing differently in the new normal
Yeah, so we have really good on-air numbers all of 2020. So according to Track Media, we are the #1 rated PBS station in the country of the 44 Nielsen rated markets. And that's as a percentage of households viewing. And so that was good for us, and I think people turned to us because they trusted us. We're their friends. They saw old friends, comfort, a warm blanket, but also information that they trusted. And so, but we also know that that's not likely to continue in the long term, given the trends around TV viewing. And so we've already been making big shifts in the digital space, more digital events, more digital engagement, more storytelling that is geared to different audiences than maybe are watching on TV. And so it's just accelerated some of those changes. It's a both and for us. We're not going to throw the TV baby out with the bathwater, because that's still a very important audience to us. And so we want to leverage that and give it the resources it needs, but simultaneously give the resources to the digital platforms and social engagement. We have a very robust thing called Chew in the Loo, which is about St. Louis's food scene, which is also really important during the pandemic because restaurants have taken such a huge hit. But St. Louis has, if you ever get to St. Louis, it's got great food. And it's a real treasure for us. And so that's a story that we've been telling repeatedly, and it's a social media group. And so that's a really robust, our colleague Joe Pressberry leads that effort. And it's, this idea of the digital platforms, it's a both and. So all of that continues for us. And much like Caryn, we were doing like 200 events a year in person, and we were running ourselves ragged. And so some of the questions I've seen are about what happens after the pandemic and what's the new normal. Well, we're not going to go back to doing all of those. One, because it was running people ragged, and we're trying to get away from our workaholism culture. How do we do really impactful things? How do we serve our community? How do we really focus our energies and our best and highest use of resources, which include our staff, but also do it sustainably? And so online events, social events, those are really a big deal.
Yeah. We have a question from the audience I'd like to put to both of you. And Amy, why don't you go first on this one? How will the changes you made during the pandemic inform the way your organizations move forward? What was temporary survival mode stuff, and what ideas will you embrace even after the pandemic has faded?
Yeah, I think it's what I just referenced. It's this kinder, gentler culture. And so when I vied for the position of CEO, even though I was the interim, I really put out there that a very diverse, inclusive, high-performing culture at 9 PBS was going to be a priority. Now that bumped up to like the #1 priority during the pandemic, and it's still an incredible priority. That's really high for us. And so how do we invest in our people? How do we not just assume we're doing good work? How do we know we're doing good work and the right work? And how do we make sure we have these feedback mechanisms and that we're building leadership across the organization? I think initially that felt maybe short term. This is really long term, the culture shift. And on some level, we're making lemonade out of a very moldy pile of lemons. And that's the benefit, is that it's allowed lots of people to step up in lots of different ways and shine in service to and with our community. So that's, in my mind, the things that'll stay. The short-term things, I think, went by the wayside pretty quickly. And also,
can you name one of them? Can you give me an example?
Well, like the need to meet every single day. I think we realized after a month, like 2 months or so, like, okay, maybe we can slow down. Like, we're going to have to run this like a marathon versus a sprint.
Yeah.
So the sense of urgency in so much of our work, I think we've tried to slow that down. Now we're running a business. We get that. I mean, we're going to always have that, but how do we do it in a way that is not running people ragged? Like initially, just the level of email and meetings and things, we're trying to slow that down and be much smarter about, it doesn't have to be an hour meeting. It can be 45 minutes or 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't have to be an email. It can be a chat via Teams. Doing things in different ways, which it's not very revolutionary. It's just different for us.
Caryn, do you want to weigh in on this question?
Yeah, what Amy just said really resonated with me because one of the big challenges we've had is staff are saying, we're exhausted. You're not paying attention that we're exhausted. Yes, I am. I know you're exhausted. But it's tough getting people to do less. I'm this close to issuing an edict to all supervisors and editors of just don't let people take assignments. Just say no. And that was a surprise because the clamor for, we're overloaded is still there. And yet when we try to make reasonable workloads, sometimes people, especially the journalists who always want to do that
Mhm.
story, resist lightened workload. So I'm in that same vein with Amy of reasonable workloads and sticking to it and teaching people how to say no and keep it reasonable, because it should not be the norm that you're working 10-12 hours a day. One of the things that will continue obviously is the hybrid workplace. What's that going to look like? Got to work through it. Not quite sure. And another thing that we were already working on but has really come through is we need ubiquitous competency across our supervisory tier. The second biggest complaint I hear from the staff after, we're overloaded, is that, well, my manager doesn't communicate as well as so-and-so's manager does. And so we've been engaging in a lot of manager training, which remote work was perfect for. And also we're using it right now, our first ever 360 performance review program where subordinates, direct reports can comment anonymously if they want to about their supervisor's performance. We've carefully crafted a set of questions to get at, DEI, organization, support of staff, professional development, and we'll redeploy those learnings into the development pathing for the supervisors. So that's new. So organizational excellence was always big. I think the pandemic has maybe pointed up some additional gaps and deficiencies, and we'll be leaning in to training and accountability for that.
Can you imagine what your first in-person staff meeting will look like?
I am going to try very hard not to cry, because honestly, when I was reviewing the photos that you asked us to contribute for the
Uh-huh.
array, there were some in there from the before times, and then also seeing those faces, and it just gets to me. So I'm going to try not to be a sap, an emotional sap in our first meeting, but it's going to be tough.
Yeah. What about you, Amy?
Oh, I'm the same. I'm actually responding to one of the chat questions. So yeah, I was exactly going to say what Caryn said. Like I feel very emotional about that. I think that we come together in ways that maybe we would be surprised by pre-pandemic. And again, we weathered a lot in that 9 months prior to the pandemic. So, we thought that we would be looking at 2020 as like this fresh new start. And it was just out of the frying pan and into the fire. So yeah, I think it's always going to look different. We were used to having a monthly all staff meeting and we had lunch and people got together. And I think people are going to be wary about getting together. Although I did go to a community event Monday night, an arts event, and the question is hugging back and our handshakes back? And they were. People were, really so happy to see each other. And I think our staff are probably going to be the same. We're trying to figure out ways that people feel comfortable. And also, if you feel comfortable, but I don't feel comfortable, that's okay. I said in the chat or the Q&A, it's okay not to be okay. We really want to know that. We had a culture that was, again, you would come to work if you were very, very sick, because it was not okay to not be okay. And now it's a different time. And so I imagine that people are going to be very emotional and feel very good about being together, but also a little wary.
Yeah.
We've all been through a lot.
Yeah, you have to go slow. Well, thank you, Caryn and Amy, for sharing all this with us. I know it's been a difficult and challenging time, and I want to thank the audience for your questions. I hope we helped you figure things out, gave you some good ideas. But we are going to be posting this video online, so you'll be able to watch it or share it with your colleagues. And our next webinar is going to be on a different reporting series, which just came out, called In This Together. It's in our latest print edition, which published on Monday, and it's also the stories are going up on our website this week. So look for that. I want to thank my colleagues Matthew Seklecki of American University School of Communication and Julie Drizzen for helping to produce the event. And thank you all again for keeping current and joining us in this conversation. Stay well and enjoy your Memorial Day holiday, and please stay in touch and let us know what's going on at your workplace through tips and other information you want to share with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Caryn.